Hi, folks. Welcome to the combined September October Aero Club safety meeting. We'll probably be doing it this way for a while. It actually worked out pretty well last time, and hopefully we'll be fine today for this meeting. I hope you enjoy what we're going to be talking about. There's some good news to share with you, and some interesting things going on. First of all, let me just say congratulations. We've had several people get either a license or update on things. Randy Fritz got his instrument rating, and Arthur Chu also this past weekend got his instrument rating. So congratulations to those folks. And if I miss somebody, I apologize. We'll catch you next month. Secondly, just so folks know, it looks like we're about 2 weeks away from getting back in the hangar. That's good news because it's getting cold outside, and Scott's getting some chilly fingers. So it's going to be great to be back into the hangar. We'll have more information for you on that. Just as a note, next week, the week of starting 1 November, the hangar is going to be completely off limits. You can't go to the restroom because they're going to be prepping and then painting and polyurethaning the floor. In fact, we're probably going to be shut down completely on Friday. Just FYI. And then in the couple of weeks following that, starting the 15th, we'll actually are going to be getting new carpet in the Aero Club, in the office area and the ready room and all the area here. So things are looking up for us and doing well. Finally, thank you all for a good year. We flew about 1,500 hours in fiscal year 2021. That's up significantly. Of course, the previous year we were impacted by COVID fairly substantially. So thank you for that. We're looking forward to a great new year and things going forward. Finally, some sad news overall. Many of you may have heard, but Shannon Wiley will be leaving us. Shannon is PCSing with her husband down to Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. Huge, 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 huge loss. I know all of you who have dealt with her have been very pleased that she's been here. It's going to be a loss. So when things don't happen quite as quick as you might want them to, blame it on me because it is going to be my fault and just mine going forward. Let's just talk about where the airplanes are. Basically, most of the airplanes are up. 36802's down, but should be up shortly. It had a problem with the manifold pressure gauge. We've got the new one, and that's coming in, being done now. 3021 Charlie has an issue with potentially with the alternator. We're now looking at that, and we'll let you know what the story is going forward on that. All the other airplanes are basically up and have been undergoing routine maintenance. Scott's been doing things outside, but again, that ain't going to happen for much longer. As I said, the hangar door is moving rapidly to completion. By tomorrow, the building should be completely closed in, and as I said, next week they'll be prepping and painting and polyurethaning the floor, and then after that, we'll be getting back into the hangar at some point. That's pretty much it from my side. I did want to talk a little bit about this month's safetygram that came from headquarters down in Texas. It was basically about maintenance. Um, as you know, we do most of the maintenance here. A group of contract mechanics, ably led by Scott Hill. Scott's been here 10 years, 10 plus years now, and has done just a super job overall. Uh, and keeping the airplanes up and going and um, working well. Um, there's basically not much we don't do on the airplanes, pretty much everything. There's some required maintenance that we do. We do 50-hour inspections as well as 100-hour inspections. Those 100-hour inspections are essentially the same as an annual and um, are much more comprehensive than the 50 hour. The 50 hours an oil change, look at things, and if there's any deferred maintenance, we'll typically do them there as well. Once an airplane reaches 2,000 hours on the engine, we have to do a complete engine check every 50 hours, and there are a couple of airplanes that are we're reaching that now. We will be doing an engine change on 36120. I don't know when that will start. It will depend on when the engine gets bought and delivered, but probably early next year we will start on that engine change. It's been now 14 years since that engine was changed, and when we reach the end of the useful life, we basically are required to change those engines. So that's a quick snapshot of the status of where things are. We are in pretty good shape financially. There are going to be, in all likelihood, some price increases. I don't know what you're seeing in your life, but certainly in mine, the price of everything's going up. We're about to be buying fuel, and I'm reasonably confident that the fuel we buy will be $1 or more a gallon expensive than the last time we bought it. So there'll be a price increase on that. We're also will likely be increasing sometime after the first of the year the price of instructors. We just need the revenue in order to make our numbers overall. Hopefully, sometime after the first of the year, we'll go back to in-person meetings. I just don't know. We have to see how things go. But we do see the COVID numbers declining, and as more people get immunized, and some of us getting a third shot now, um, we'll just have to see where things end up. There's still restrictions on the base. If you're anywhere on the base and in the building, you have to be wearing a mask with a few exceptions. And it is important that we all comply with that. So January 12th, we'll be starting a private pilot ground school. Go for 12 weeks. If you know anybody who's interested, have them call us at the club and we'll get them the information. We'll go for 12 weeks. Secondly, if anybody's interested in an instrument ground school, we may be able to put something together there, but we're only going to do it if we have enough people involved. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nate, talk about a very interesting topic, and we'll see you in November. I hope you have a good holidays. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our October safety meeting content. Tonight, we're going to talk about departure emergencies and the impossible turn. I apologize in advance. This is something I really want to cover in person because I think it actually establishes a great discussion. Afterwards, feel free to please discuss this with your instructors, and even feel free to reach out to me if you'd like. So that said, let's get into it. So there's an article in the October 21 Flying Magazine, and I really like this chart, so that's why I took a picture of it and included it. It's a way to break up the departure phase of flight. It starts with the takeoff roll and runs through different scenarios that you can break down this phase into, including if you have runway remaining, that initial climb out where there's no runway behind you, and then your departure climb where we've got sufficient altitude and a boatload more options. What are those options? They might be just bring the power up to idle and continue rolling, or bring the power off and land straight ahead. In that high risk initial climb area, our options pretty much are just a controlled crash, flying the airplane through the crash straight ahead. And finally, when we get enough altitude, now maybe we can attempt to land on a runway. So how do we translate this to Hanscom? So here's runway 29, and here's some landmarks. There's the start of your takeoff roll on 29, which is not the very start of the runway because nobody back taxis to the numbers normally. If you do, that's great, but considering most people don't, instead, here's some numbers for us to work with. The runway intersection of 29 and 23 is about 3,500 feet from where you would start your takeoff roll. Then there's actually 4,000 feet of pavement remaining. Total runway length is 7,001 feet with the addition of the overrun areas. There's 1,000 feet of overrun area that in an emergency like this, absolutely don't hesitate to use. Some numbers from the POH to help work with this. For the most part, we all know it's around 700 feet is what we calculate to clear a 50-foot obstacle in a short takeoff in a Warrior. So that's some numbers to give us an idea of what we're dealing with in terms of how much runway have we burned and what is our altitude where. And obviously, this all changes depending on the winds of the day, the weight on board the aircraft, so on and so forth. There's also a table in the POH for best glide performance. So given perfect conditions, so there's no wind, an experienced test pilot in a brand new plane, and he's not hesitated to transition to glide speed of 79 or in the Arrow or 73 in the Warrior, haven't made any turns, you have no flaps in. Sure, that's all going to happen. Not quite. We all know that. But given all that magical situation, you can get per the curve 1.875 nautical miles per 1,000 feet. Reality tells us it's going to be less, way less. A comfortable number maybe is 1.25 miles per 1,000 feet. Some options that we have during our takeoff roll. So in our takeoff roll, we're talking somewhere in that 3,500 foot range, and probably less than half of that, so probably within 1,000 feet. Just bring the power back to idle. We're not going to run out of runway, and this is a pretty easy scenario at Hanscom. Once we've gotten our wheels off the ground, it's a different story. But if we haven't crossed the runway intersection with 2-3 yet, you still have 4,000 feet to go. Sometimes, I mean, this is a situation where there's more runway remaining, honestly, than some airports we've normally landed. So it's very realistic where we could make a good landing into what's on the rest of the runway. After takeoff, though, and once we've got the runway behind us, our options get pretty bad pretty fast in this area. There's a swamp and a river, and actually some hills right off to the not far from the end of the numbers on runway 11 there, off to the left side of where our airplane is. So we're talking at most we got about a half mile, say at 400 feet, that we can try to do a controlled crash into. In this case, don't even try a restart. Fly straight ahead, fly the plane through the crash, and at this point, life, safety, and survival is the priority, not saving the airplane. We gain some altitude, our options get better, but they're still not perfect to try to attempt to turn back to the airfield. In this case, 1,000 feet, and I've got us, we've translated enough where until we've had a problem where now we're far enough away from the airport. Now it's like a normal power off scenario where there's some fields that are an option and might have some time to attempt to restart. So we should be doing that as quickly as we can. Speaking of restarts, 6 items in the Warrior that should be burned into our memories at this point. Fuel, we switch tanks. Ignition, we check to make sure it's on both magnetos. Primer's in and locked. Fuel pump is on. Mixture's rich, and carb heat is on. And after that, keep trying to fly the airplane. And the Aero, there's 5 items. Fuel on both tank, or switch fuel tanks. Magnetos, make sure it's on both. Electric fuel pump on, mixture rich, and we switch the alternate air to open. We don't have a carb heat in the Aero because it's fuel injected. So what if we take that situation where I'm 1,000 feet, but say I've had a large headwind and I haven't translated so far over? Turning back towards the airfield might actually be an option because I don't have all the obstacles in my way. So in terms of distance to make the turn before I actually have wheels touching something might actually be more favorable. So in this case, a turn back towards the airfield doesn't necessarily mean aiming for the runway. And there are plenty of other areas and openings on the airfield that might be better than going into the trees in this situation. So that's where our options get better. But I still wouldn't say that a turn back to the runway itself is an option in this scenario. So now we're actually going to shift towards the ASI video. It's about 10 minutes. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll wrap up in the
2021 crash of a Beechcraft Bonanza A36 in Pembroke Pines, Florida, resurfaced debate about the turnback, or the impossible turn, an engine-out course reversal shortly after takeoff to land in the opposite direction on the departing runway. Initial NTSB reports indicate the pilot of the Bonanza attempted a turnback with disastrous results. Opponents of the turnback argue that it's impossible in some aircraft and near impossible in the rest. Even with a glide ratio that makes the turnback technically possible, they say, the difficulty of the maneuver, close proximity to the ground, a startle factor, and the stress of life or death consequences all conspire against a successful outcome. Proponents argue that turnbacks are a viable option for some pilots in some aircraft under some circumstances. As for the FAA, they caution that CFIs should train single-engine pilots not to attempt a turnback unless altitude, best glide performance, and pilot skill allow for a safe return. In April, the AOPA Air Safety Institute flew test profiles in several aircraft to determine the feasibility of the so-called impossible turn. We flew turnback profiles at Martinsburg, West Virginia's 8,800-foot-long, 150-foot-wide runway. Our lineup included me in my 150-horsepower 1993 Piper PA-18 Super Cub with full gas. Editor-at-large Dave Hirschman flew solo in his Vans RB4, fully fueled. AOPA Director of Flight Operations Luz Beatty, alone in a fully fueled 1978 Cessna 172 November. And Hirschman and AOPA Vice President of Flight Operations Dave Roy in a 1971 Beechcraft Bonanza A36 with a 300-horsepower Continental IO 550, full gas, and 40 pounds of baggage. Prior to the exercise, we all climbed to altitude and practiced stalls, including stalls in 45 degrees of bank, to calibrate the actual stall speeds at play during our turnback exercise. We then established our minimum required turnback altitudes using a technique inspired by airline pilot and CFI Brian Schiff. We set a climb profile, cut the power to idle, and began an idle power 45-degree bank turn at best glide for 360 degrees, noting the altitude lost.
Lost 1,000 feet.
The idea behind using a 360-degree turn is that practicing at 180 degrees is not enough. The 180 degrees will get you turned around, but abeam the runway. In reality, it takes more turn to get back over to the runway and aligned with the runway centerline. With stall numbers and expected turnback altitude requirements freshly established, we each flew 3 profiles in near-perfect conditions: cool, sunny morning, light winds, and low-density altitude on a simulated 4,000-foot-long runway. The plan was to climb between VX and VY with full power to the predetermined altitude, cut power to idle, delay 3 seconds to simulate a startle period, then push to best glide while entering a 45-degree bank turn back to the runway. I went first in the Super Cub.
All right, here we go. All right, let's climb out at 60. Really halfway between VX and VY. Go to 300 feet and try it. Engine failure. 1001, 1002, 1003. Now react. Push over, catch best glide.
The Super Cub returned to a simulated 4,000-foot-long runway in all three turnback attempts, one at 500 feet AGL and two at 300 feet AGL. In fact, I estimate I could have returned back to a 2,000-foot-long runway in the Super Cub. Next up, Dave Hirschman in his RV4. Hirschman initiated turnbacks at 1,000 feet AGL.
$900 for 1,000. Here comes 1,000. Okay, power back. 1,001, 1,002, 1,003.
He made it back, barely, 2 out of 3 times. The third time would have resulted in a landing short of the runway. Hirschman's performance may have been impacted by his 3-blade constant speed propeller that created far more drag at high RPM setting than a fixed pitch prop width. Luz Beatty made her turnbacks at 1,000 feet AGL, 800 feet AGL, and 600 feet AGL. She comfortably returned to the runway each time. Both Beatty and I may have benefited from some idle thrust with engines still running, but experts such as Catherine Cavagnaro advised us that the light thrust we might have received at idle power was somewhat offset by the drag from the moving propeller, so the advantages of an engine at idle are believed to be minimal. The last airplane to try the turnback profile was the Bonanza, and those results were perhaps the most startling.
Airspeed's alive. Okay, coming up on 1,000.
4528, we now clear to re-enter the right downwind 426. Cap
1,
4528, re-enter the left
2,
downwind.
3.
Thank you, sir. Left downwind for 4520.
So there's 100 knots. And under 0 Sierra is beginning the runway turn back. Come prep.
0 Sierra wind.
Go ahead.
05, runway 8, clear to land.
Clear to land, runway 8, under 0 Sierra.
No, that's not
We'll
doing
push
a
it
damn
back
thing.
in.
Yep, you got it. And I'll get the gear.
Okay.
Let me know.
Well, let's hold it. Just a second.
Yep.
Nowhere close.
No.
Absolutely nowhere close. Okay, get the gear down, please.
Turning back at 1,000 feet AGL and varying speeds from best glide 110 knots to 95 knots to reduce the turn radius, and propeller settings from high to low RPM, Dave Roy and Hirschman didn't come close to making it back to the runway in any attempt.
This is nowhere close.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like
there's
this
no
is
way.
there's nothing that we could do here that's gonna bring it in.
Even in an optimum glide configuration with landing gear and flaps up, the Bonanza would have come down well short of a simulated 4,000-foot-long runway. Our takeaway is that turning back is a viable option for certain aircraft in the right conditions flown by proficient pilots who train for the maneuver. It's not a good option for aircraft with high climb speed and high best glide speed, as we learned with the Bonanza. These speeds combine to take you farther from the runway on departure and result in more offset in the turnback, leaving you longer distance to glide. Pilots flying aircraft with these characteristics should eliminate turnbacks as an option for engine failure after takeoff. Variables like wind, temperature, density, altitude, runway length, and technique could affect these results, but not enough to change our overall recommendations. Please don't try to fly this exercise solo in an attempt to prove us wrong or confirm our results. We've lost pilots training in these maneuvers due to the high potential for an uncoordinated stall and spin in the turnback. Fly with a CFI at altitude first and determine your strategy in the event of an engine failure on takeoff.
So I hope you enjoyed the video. And to wrap up what we were talking about, here's a table of some recommendations, but these aren't things that you must follow in terms of exact numbers. Every situation is going to be different. So definitely practice with an instructor. Like we said, even you heard the caveats in the video. Don't attempt to do this on your own. A lot of people have been hurt in the process trying to do that. So, but for our takeoff roll, obviously, if something happens, then we bring the power off and brake and try it again another day. If we've got runway remaining, try to land in the runway remaining. In that initial climb, our options are pretty poor, so instead we try to fly through the crash and make the best of it. During that departure climb, now we have some time to attempt a restart, turn, land in fields and clearings, possibly coming back to the airfield. I would try to brief this plan with your passengers and yourself so that we get in the habit of establishing what those minimums are, and then it becomes second nature if there is a problem. Remember, every time we turn, we're losing altitude in the process of converting that vertical component of lift to the horizontal component. So let's try to minimize and keep turns shallow. We also don't want to go and stall the aircraft in the process. Stall speed increases with banks. So let's keep those turns shallow if we need to make them. And finally, remember what our goals are. Life safety aboard you and your passengers in the aircraft, and then also anyone on the ground. And finally, the last thing we're thinking about at this point is salvaging the airplane. So the plane could be, damaged and totaled, and we still want everyone to be able to walk away and talk about the incident later on. We'd much prefer that than someone trying to attempt to save the airplane and losing life in the process. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next time.